Hello, I'm Ollie, and this is Criminolly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, I'm going to talk to you about all the books I read for GarbAugust. So GarbAugust sadly is over. In fact, it's very over because it's the middle of September when I'm filming this. So my brief period of ill health unfortunately delayed me filming this video. It's going to be a long video, so you might want to go and get yourself a cup of tea or coffee before you start. So I've got 40 books to talk to you about today. Which is the number of books I read during GarbAugust. I'm going to have to, so some of them obviously were physical, some of them were Kindle books. So I'll be flitting between physical books and my iPad where I've got the list of all of them so I don't miss any. So this video might be a bit even less professional than normal. What I'll try and do as I go through is say which square on the GarbIngo card that particular book ticked off. So I did manage to tick off all of the GarbIngo card squares, which was my intention for the month, and also covered off all of the various weekly prompts that we had for GarbAugust. So if you remember, the weekly prompts were men's adventure or category romance for the first week, paperbacks from hell or vintage smut for the second week, books by celebrities or novelisations for the third week, and then the fourth week was anything goes, or it was like ended up being a week and a half, didn't it, last week? So yes, so I've got a lot to talk to you about today. We will see how I get on. But yeah, hopefully I can get through it all. So let's start at the beginning. And what I'm going to do normally for these monthly wrap-up videos, I do like a ranking of most enjoyed or least enjoyed to most enjoyed, but there's just too many books. There's just too many books to do that. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about each book, but I'm going to do them in the order that I read them. So the first thing I read then for GarbAugust was Texas Storm, one of the Macbolan Executioner books by Don Pendleton. So this was a fun one, typical men's adventure type stuff, and this was read for the men's adventure week. Enjoyed it a lot. Not an outstanding entry in the Executioner series, but certainly a decent one. This ticked off, bingo card wise, this ticked off the book from a series with more than 100 entries, because there are over 400 books in the Executioner series. In that first week then, I also read on Kindle, so I read Vigilante by Marv Wolfman, which is a DC comic kind of a spin-off about this character Vigilante who'd been in, I think, the Teen Titans comics. It was okay. I mean, it wasn't great. It wasn't as good as I was expecting it to be. I had reasonably high hopes in terms of it being like quite trashy but quite fun. But yeah, it just wasn't all that. It felt kind of very late 70s, early 80s. So that ticked off anyway, the Vigilante square on the bingo card. I then read another Kindle book to tick off the Shifter Romance square on the bingo card, and also kind of fits into category romance as well. So that was The Gargoyle Gets a Girlfriend by Calandra Hunter, which was a lesbian shifter romance where one of the characters was a gargoyle. It was reasonably fun. The actual romance side of it was quite sweet, but there was no kind of romantic tension in it, which was a bit disappointing. There was a bit of tension around whether other people would find out that this woman was a gargoyle. But yeah, all in all, it was a little bit slight. So also read in that first week Your Secret Admirer by Richard Laymon, writing as Carl Laymon. So Richard Laymon, obviously a well-known purveyor of trashy horror from the kind of 80s and 90s in particular. This was actually a young adult book he wrote. So a kind of mystery suspense kind of book. So a bit like, I guess, the kind of point horror that or Fear Street kind of books, that kind of teen suspense type thing, about this girl getting these mysterious letters from a secret admirer that get like gradually creepier and creepier. So that was, again, it was okay. It was quite an entertaining read, and had a reasonable twist at the end, I seem to remember. So that ticked off 2 bingo card squares. So it ticked off the Richard Laymon square, and also the book published under a pseudonym square. Another one for category romance that I read was The Blacksmith's Mail Order Bride by Cindy Caldwell, which was kind of a Western romance about a relationship between this kind of feisty young woman in a town and this kind of mild-mannered blacksmith. No mail order brides in it, although I think it's from a series of books about mail order brides, and there was like this catalogue of brides that was referred to, so that was okay, but not fantastic. That did tick off though the weirdly specific title or kind of subgenre category or square on the bingo card, so I quite enjoyed that, but it wasn't brilliant. Then read another physical book. So to tick off the gang square on the GarbAugust card, I read the Shrewsdale exit by John Buell, which has this absolutely amazing cover of this guy drinking milk badly. So this was really good. So definitely taps into that kind of 70s vibe of men getting revenge when terrible things have happened for their families, but takes that kind of plot line in a direction I wasn't expecting at all, and was really interesting and entertaining as a result. So about a guy whose his wife and daughter get murdered by this gang of bikers, and about what he does about that. But it was interesting. Okay, next up then. So I felt like I hadn't read a proper category romance, like a kind of Harlequin, Mills and Boon style category romance. So I read from this Mills and Boon Heroes double. I read Conrad County Canine Detectives by Rachel Lee, which was really fun. I really enjoyed this. So about a relationship between two ex-military people, both of whom have dogs, and they live in this town where there's this weird cult, like weird kind of Christian religious organisation, or I don't know what you call it, even like a church, I suppose, where this like people have gone missing. So it was about them investigating that together and gradually falling in love. So it was a really decent, solid category romance. Also read in the kind of men's adventure vein, and this was to tick off the book with an exclamation mark in the title square on the GarbAugust card, Raise the Titanic by Clive Cussler. This was a reread for me, so I've read this at least once, maybe twice before. It is a fun book. So it's about raising the Titanic. So the plot is basically there's this mysterious mineral that the American government need for like a top secret energy project they've got. But the only place it exists on the whole planet happens to be in the hold of the Titanic for various reasons. And Dirk Pitt, who's the hero of these books, has to raise the Titanic in order to get it. So written in the 70s, so there's loads of kind of Cold War spy stuff in it as well. But just, yeah, quite an entertaining read. Okay, another category romance, and this also ticked off the set in a hospital square on the bingo card. So this was Celebrity Sweet Nurse by Suzanne Roberts. So this was really fun. So like a 60s romance about this nurse who works in like the special celebrity ward in a hospital, and about her trying to choose between this doctor who she's had been having a relationship with, who's like a really decent guy but kind of boring, and this pop star who's checked into the celebrity suite, who's like super handsome and exciting but also a bit flaky. So just a sweet, entertaining romance. I really quite enjoyed it. Right, moving on then. So one more book for week one. This was another one I read for Men's Adventure. So this was Frenzi, the Mafia Massacre by R.J. Calder. So this is a modern Men's Adventure book, so only published in the last couple of years, but set in the 70s and very much taps into that executioner style vibe of, you know, like one man against the mafia. So in this book, the one man is actually a mafia enforcer who realizes that his bosses are terrible people when they basically something they do, and I can't remember the exact details, but his neighbour, who he quite likes, ends up getting killed as a result of mafia stuff. So Frenzi, who's the hero, decides to take revenge on them. So that was a decently entertaining men's adventure type thing. Right, moving into week two then. So week two, as I said, was Paperbacks from Hell or Vintage Smut. So first book I read for that, doesn't actually fit either of those categories, albeit there was a lot of explicit sex in it. So that's Captain Blood by Michael Blodgett. So Michael Blodgett was an actor and screenwriter, but also wrote a couple of novels. This was a bonkers book. So it's about this character called Captain Blood, that's his actual name, who exists in like Los Angeles in the 70s, in the kind of in the, I suppose, kind of slightly in the counterculture, but not fully. There's like, I think it's the daughter of a friend of his dies of a drug overdose, and he decides to go after the drug gangs, which he does in bizarre ways. This book just got increasingly weird. I mean, it started off weird, and it got even weirder as it went on. In particular, there's this very strange character who's a vet who works for like the kind of drug lord, looking after the horses in more ways than one, on his ranch. And Captain Blood ends up kind of having a bit of a relationship with her. So it was a really strange book, but definitely memorable. Okay, so for the Paperbacks from Hell, and this isn't a true paperback from Hell in that it's a new book, but very much in the vein of those old paperbacks, was Rattus, New York, by Hunter Shea. So this was my Patreon book club pick for the month. So my patrons pick a book for us to read every month together. Rattus, New York was the book we read this month. So this was about a couple of exterminators in New York who were, I think, a couple, albeit their relationship was kind of crumbling a bit, who go up against these giant killer rats, basically, who've been mutated by this. I think it's something that was supposed to get rid of the rats, has actually made them more vicious and stronger. So it's it's people against killer rats in New York. So it was as fun as that concept sounds. It wasn't amazing, but it was definitely entertaining. Then read for the Vintage Smut section or week, The Bigamist by William Hegner. This also ticked off a number of different prompts on the GarbAugust card. So a dirty book, a book with nudity on the cover, a book you'd be ashamed to read in public, a book with a cigarette ad in it. So you've got a little ad there for what it's called, True Cigarettes. Never heard of True Cigarettes before. And also on the other side, an ad for Newport cigarettes with this slightly disturbing couple with a, I don't know, it's just a strange picture, isn't it? I think they're supposed to be having fun, but and it's also a book with green on the cover. So green on the cover was to honour Pax from Pax Panic, who was one of our co-hosts last year. So she was the central square on the bingo card in memory of her. So this was not great. But it sounds like William Hegner was a reasonably big deal back in the day. So apparently he had sold over 1 million books. But he's kind of like a low-rent Harold Robbins. And given that Harold Robbins is already quite low rent, that's really low rent. So this was about a guy who's like a TV executive, who's a bigamist, who has 2 separate wives and 2 separate families, and is kind of trying to juggle the two. So it was reasonably interesting in terms of the like inner workings of the TV industry in the 70s. Or was it even the 60s? I can't remember when it came out. I'm going to pause unprofessionally now and check. Yeah, 77. So yeah, it's kind of interesting in terms of the inner workings of the TV industry, but not that great apart from that. And I think surprisingly unsaucy as well. There was a bit of a lack of sex in it. Okay, then read, and this ticked off definitely ticks off the Paperbacks from Hell week, because it is featured in Paperbacks from Hell, the book The Devil's Laughter by William W. Johnstone, which was this was our group read for GarbAugust. So this is a book that Pax had read last year. So that was that central square on the bingo card you could tick off either by reading a book with green on the cover or by reading a book that Pax had read for GarbAugust last year. I actually ended up reading 2. So yeah, The Devil's Laughter was not great by any means. So a slightly weird mix of kind of men's adventure, Satanist horror, and like rabid Republican politics. So basically about this guy who lives in a small town, who's like a complete gun nut. He's got like hundreds of guns, and I think he's supposed to be a writer as well. So there's obviously a bit of Johnstone kind of, creating himself or creating a character in his own image in the book. So this guy's investigating a series of, there's a Satanist gang in the town, and they've done terrible things. So it's about him investigating that, and it was kind of reasonably entertaining. Had a wild twist at the end, which I wasn't expecting, which was quite unpleasant in the end. But yeah, it was just a bit too much. There were too many rants about liberals and things like that. Another paperback from hell I read was and The Devil's Laughter ticked off the book with Satanist Square on the GarbAugust card as well. So another paperback from hell, albeit not one that's actually in paperbacks from hell, but of that kind of similar vintage, was The Bog by Michael Talbot, which ticked off the step back cover. I forgot what they were called for a second there. Step back cover square on the GarbAugust card. So this was good. So this is about an American archaeologist and his wife who are living in the UK, who he's doing a dig at this bog, and discovers a person, a body that's been preserved in within the bog, so preserved for centuries. But there's this weird local landowner. There's all kinds of kind of supernaturally stuff going on. There's this weird creature that lives in the bog that kills people. So there's loads of different stuff going on in this book. And it went in a really weird direction in the second half, which I quite enjoyed. I thought maybe it went a bit too far in places. It went a bit too weird, but it was definitely enjoyable. So yeah, a nice slice of 80s horror. Okay, next. Another kind of vintage smut book, and this also ticked off the Jilly Cooper square on the GarbAugust card. So I read Riders by Jilly Cooper, a huge 900 plus page novel about the kind of show jumping set in the UK, and various relationships between different people within that show jumping set. So two main characters, one of whom is kind of Romany origin and very poor, one of whom is like a toff basically, and a complete wanker, Rupert, who's kind of the anti-hero of the books, and I think features in several books that Jilly Cooper wrote, and it's about the rivalry between them. It was just fun. I really, really enjoyed it. It goes on a lot. But you get invested in the characters. Some of the kind of detail of show jumping was quite interesting. They go to the Los Angeles Olympics, and there's loads of name dropping that goes on of various celebrities and people like that they see there. There's tons of sex. There's all sorts of stuff going on in this book, and I really did have a good time with it. Okay, next up then, another kind of modern paperback from hell, Snow Shark by Brian Berry, which I read to tick off the Killer Animal square on the GarbAugust card, albeit Rattus New York would have done that as well. So this is a book about a genetically engineered shark that's been engineered to be able to live and hunt in any sort of water. So accidentally, it's been transported by the military, and they accidentally drop it from their plane into a ski resort, and it goes crazy in that ski resort and eats people. Pretty fun concept, and it was an entertaining book. I had a good time with it. Next up, some more vintage smut. This one quite disappointing. So to tick off the Jackie Collins square on the GarbAugust card, I read The Stud, which was one of her first books. I didn't enjoy this at all. So written in 1969, I think it was, set in kind of swinging 60s London, based around a nightclub with the delightful name of Hobo, and just follows the various characters, one of whom's the manager of the nightclub, one of whom's I think the daughter of someone who knows him, one of whom is there's this rich heiress and things like that. So there's quite a lot of sex in the book, quite a lot of kind of argument, people arguing with each other and things like that, disagreeing about things. But yeah, overall quite disappointing. Didn't enjoy it nearly as much as the other Jackie Collins book I've read, Hollywood Wives, which I thought was fantastic. Right, we are nearly at the end of week 2. So the final book I read for week 2 was Flowers in the Attic by V.C. Andrews. So this ticked off the V.C. Andrews square on the GarbAugust card. So a reread for me, and this is one of those books that's kind of, I think it kind of fits both weeks for that week. So it's a paperback from hell, but it is also kind of vintage smut, and indeed, you know, arguably quite an important book in the coming of age of many young people who lived in the 70s. You know, I think it got passed around school playgrounds quite a lot. So, you know, I probably don't need to tell you what the plot of Flowers in the Attic is because it's very well known, but basically these kids, for various reasons, get imprisoned in the attic, and the two elder ones, brother and sister, end up having a relationship. And it's a crazy book. It goes on, it's got like a nice gothic vibe to it. The writing is, you know, it was V.C. Andrews' first book, and many times it feels like a first book. It is quite rough around the edges, I think. The plotting is a bit, you know, the pacing and things like that are a bit off at times. And that relationship between the brother and the sister, which was kind of the big draw of the book, that was like the scandal about the book at the time, doesn't happen until the final third of the book. But there's just so much weird and wonderful stuff going on in this book that I still really enjoyed it, even on the reread. Okay, so moving on to week 3 then. So week 3 was books by famous people or novelizations. So the first book I read by a famous person was The Satsuma Complex by Bob Mortimer. So Bob Mortimer is a British comedian and TV personality. This was an entertaining, so it's like a mystery novel written very much in the voice of Bob Mortimer. So you do sometimes wonder with books written by famous people whether they actually wrote them. But this one is so identifiably Bob Mortimer's sense of humour that I'm sure he did write it. So very silly. So about this guy who meets a woman in a pub, and she then disappears, and it's about him trying to figure out what's happened. So there's all sorts of stuff going on in the plot. There's a lot more to it than that. But yeah, the humour side of it was really well done, and the plot was good enough to keep you interested. So yeah, quite enjoyed that one. And then for novelisations, I read this a book very kindly sent to me by Roy from the channel Roy Reads Anything, who was one of the co-hosts. So I read Mary by Nat Cassidy from the... No, not Mary by Nat Cassidy. I'm getting confused. This character is called Mary. Mary is a completely different book. So this book is Growing Wild, which is about the character Mary from the TV show EastEnders. It was by Hugh Miller. So basically EastEnders, hugely popular soap in the UK, started in the 80s. Fairly early on, they did this series of books that told the like origin stories or background stories of key members of the cast, or not the cast, you know, key characters in the show. So Mary was this kind of cool punk character in the show, who my sister and I thought were great. We both thought she was brilliant at the time. So this is about her kind of growing up, falling into kind of punk music, hanging out with bands, getting pregnant, all sorts of stuff going on, like drug addiction and things like that. So it was quite bleak, but the bleakness was often quite tempered, because it was, you know, released to tie in with a popular soap opera. But it was you know, reasonably entertaining and quite readable. Also read that week, and this ticked off the based on a video game square on the Gar Bingo card, a book called Taken by the Tetris Blocks by an author called Leonard Delaney. So this was this was a book about a woman having sex with Tetris blocks. So it's a short story. The basic concept is aliens have come down who are basically Tetris blocks and have become part of human society, or, you know, our society. And this woman ends up having a relationship with some of them. So it was like deliberately stupid, but actually quite entertaining. There was a second story in this book, which I actually preferred, which was called Pounded by Pluto, which is about a scientist flying to Pluto and thereafter having a sexual relationship with Pluto. And it was that one was just hilariously funny. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that one more than the Tetris one. Right, so now we get on to Mary by Nat Cassidy. So not technically a trashy book. So I read this as a buddy read with one of my patrons. So I do a buddy read each month with one of my patrons. This was the pick of Chloe. So this was excellent, and actually I think covered a lot of kind of trashy themes. So a lot of kind of like urban legend type themes, conspiracy theory type themes in this book, but basically about a woman who's going through the menopause, who has to, for various reasons, go back to the town she grew up in. And there's been a on the day she was born, it was discovered that there was a serial killer operating in this town, and he was killed by the police. So there's all sorts of like weirdness that she uncovers when she goes back to the town, as a middle-aged woman. I thoroughly enjoyed this. I've done a full review of it on the channel, which you can check out if it sounds interesting. I really thought it was pretty excellent. Okay, we're getting there. Okay, we're over halfway through. So next one then, another novelisation. So this is Love Over Gold by Susanna James, which is a novelisation of the Nescafe Gold Blend, or what were they called? I'm trying to remember. Someone did tell me what they were called in other territories, like Brewer's Choice or something like that. So a series of coffee adverts basically that told the kind of build up to this relationship of this couple, so them kind of meeting and flirting and eventually getting together. So this is the novelisation of those adverts, which includes all of the adverts, which was quite fun. So the bits that you can identify as having been in the ads were quite entertaining. And it was okay. It was a diverting read. It wasn't fantastic, but I did quite enjoy it. And yeah, shockingly, that was a reread for me. I did read that initially when it first came out. Next then, for the Killer Kids square on the GarbAugust card, I read a book called Killer Kids, 10 Cases of Kids Who Killed Their Parents, by an author called John Cassidy, or Johnny Cassidy rather. This was not very good. So this is basically 10 like true crime accounts of 10 events of crime where children had murdered their parent, but it's not just children as in people under the age of 18. Some of the cases were adults who had murdered their parents, and it's just a fairly straightforward retelling of each of those cases, without much of note added. So that a lot of them did sound like quite interesting cases that brought up in your mind quite interesting theories about why these things might have happened, to do with factors in society and things like that. But the book overall just felt exploitative and not terribly good. So fit for GarbAugust, but not necessarily a very good book. So next up then, another book by a celebrity. So this ticks off the book by a celebrity square on the GarbAugust card, of which there is one. When She Was Bad by Kate O'Mara. So Kate O'Mara, British actress who was in a number of Hammer horror movies, Doctor Who, and in Dynasty as well. I think she was Joan Collins' sister in Dynasty. So this is a book about a middle-aged actress who's definitely not based on Kate O'Mara, having a relationship with a younger man. But it turns out that when she was much younger, she had a daughter who she gave up for adoption, and her daughter is now kind of 16, 17 and wants to meet her mother again, and it's about everything blowing up as a result of that. So lots of sex, lots of kind of quite interesting stuff about the inner workings of film sets and things like that. So they're filming a movie in Italy. So that side of it was quite interesting. But yeah, basically just an enjoyable, slightly saucy romp. Right, next up, another novelisation, and again a reread. So I read the novelisation of the movie Gremlins by George Gipe. So I originally read this when it first came out, because I wasn't old enough to go and see Gremlins at the cinema, because it was a 15 in the UK. I'm still bitter about that, because it definitely shouldn't have been a 15. But anyway, it was a fun read. Weird in that you learn, you get kind of sequences that are kind of like the inner thoughts of what's he called, the main Mogwai, I forget his name now, Gizmo, like the inner thoughts of Gizmo and stuff about that, kind of his backstory and things like that, which was a bit odd, but overall it was fun enough. I then also read Demon Seed by Dean Koontz. So this was one that Andrew from the channel It Came From The Page, who was one of my GarbAugust co-hosts, had read and really enjoyed. I really enjoyed it too. So originally written in the 70s, this version is one that Dean Koontz kind of made some alterations to in the 90s. But a quite interesting story about a woman who's trapped inside like an intelligent house, basically. So it's like an automated house where everything is controlled by a computer, but this AI has managed to infiltrate that computer system and take over the house. So an interesting book about, kind of gender politics to an extent, and like the male gaze and things like that. It was quite tense. One set piece in particular was outstandingly good, and there was also another like new short story, kind of a semi-sequel to it, at the end as well. So that was quite fun. Right, next up then, this ticks off, I think, the final square on the GarbAugust card. Oh no, hold on, I've missed one. There's two more squares on the GarbAugust card. So to tick off the conspiracy theory square on the GarbAugust card, I read The Visitation by Sean Hudson, which is a UFO novel from the early 80s, I think. It was quite fun. So it's about a family being troubled by UFO sightings and weird goings on, and kind of people not believing them. So this is a fictional sequel to a supposedly true book. So there was a book called The Uninvited that was written by a journalist that was supposedly the true account of a family who got terrorised by a UFO. So that was published as truth. Sean Hudson was then hired by the publisher to write two sequels, which are fiction, but were kind of presented as being true. So this was the first on The Visitation. The Abduction, which is also in this collection, is the other one. So yeah, quite entertaining. I mean, Sean Hudson's always quite fun. He can spin a quick, enjoyable story. Much less sex and violence, sadly, than you normally get in a Sean Hudson book. But it was interesting enough. And then the final square on the GarbAugust card then was the Sexy Vampire Square. So I read Guilty Pleasures by Laurel K. Hamilton, the first of the Anita Blake Vampire Hunter books. I didn't particularly enjoy this. It was okay, but it just felt so 90s. It was ridiculous. Did it come out in the 90s? It did, 1993. Yeah, super 90s. I think the books get a bit crazier and a bit sexier from what I've been told as they go on. But basically, Anita Blake is I think she can raise people from the dead, but she's also like a detective and vampire hunter, and goes after a serial killer who's killing vampires in this book. It was okay, but I didn't love it. Next up then, so that's all the squares on the GarbAugust card ticked off, and we are now into the well into the Anything Goes week. I forgot to say that. So final week was Anything Goes. So I read next then Phantom Lover by Susan Napier, which was slightly weird. So about this, the kind of basic setup is this woman has been receiving and exchanging romantic letters with a guy, but it turns out there's been a kind of mistaken identity thing going on. But then they meet and fall in love anyway, basically, is the plot. But the guy was such a complete shit that I kind of found it hard to take. So yeah, I didn't particularly enjoy that one. Then read The Perfume by Caroline B. Cooney. So this is another book that Pax from Pax Reading read last year. This was okay. I didn't particularly enjoy it. So it's about this girl who buys this weird perfume at a mall, and it kind of awakens in her unborn twin. So she was in the womb, she was a twin, but the other twin was never born. But kind of her personality comes out because of this perfume. I don't know. It was a bit weird. Then read another book called Phantom Lover. So this is Phantom Lover by Rebecca York. So this was a lot more fun. So this is kind of a gothic romance where this woman who's like a private detective goes to pretend to be the governess in this kind of mansion because her ex-lover is in trouble. So the ex-lover's sister has contacted her and says that she thinks her brother's in trouble. She goes there, and it appears that the brother has died, and she ends up meeting his ghost and having sexy times with his ghost. It was bonkers, but it was really, really enjoyable. Okay, moving on then. Whoops, nearly toppled a stack of books there. So I read Mermaid of Venice by Jinsey Lumpkin. this was great. This is super trashy, super GarbAugust appropriate, really, really fun. First in the series, and Jincy has very kindly sent me the other books in the series on Kindle as well, so I will be reading those at some point. So this is about a woman who's a mermaid who always kills her lovers. And it starts with her killing one of her lovers, and then she starts a relationship with another guy. So the whole book is kind of a romance between these two characters with lots and lots of sexy times. But you kind of know that at the end she's going to kill him. It was, I really, really enjoyed it a lot. Then read another killer animal book, again one that was sent to me by the author. So this was Killipede by Marek Z. Turner, which is a book about killer centipedes set in the UK. Some nice kind of horror set pieces and things like that, particularly in the prologue. The prologue was fantastic. And a decent set of characters as well. So a nicely diverse set of characters going up against these killer centipedes. I really enjoyed it. Another one sent to me by the author was Darkness Below by Barbara Cottrell. So this is a book that kind of plays on the kind of, Cthulhu mythos and things like that. So essentially, it's set at Miskatonic University, and it's the first in a series of books. And the concept is that everything that Lovecraft wrote was actually based on truth. And, other people who've written Lovecraftian stories since then are, continuing to reveal the truth about the state of the world to people. And there's this young woman who's a student at the university. There's mysterious goings on. There's a death at the start of it. And it's about her investigating all of that and trying to figure out what's going on. Just a fun spin on the kind of Lovecraft type stuff. So that was entertaining. Then read another paperback from hell, so Fallen Angel by Michael Avalone, which is the first of the Satan Sleuth books. This was quite fun. So MJ from the channel Reading This Life did a review of, or an article about this series of books for the latest issue of Occult Detective magazine, and had a mini interview with the son of the author, who said that essentially the concept was kind of, what if Batman lost his, what if Bruce Wayne, rather than losing his parents as a kid, lost his wife as an adult, and the people who killed his wife were the Manson family. And he then becomes Batman and goes up against the Manson family. And that, if you can imagine that, that's kind of it. So it was an entertaining but very overblown kind of revenge novel. Okay, then read, we're nearly at the end now. I've only got 2 more books to go after this one, so 3 more books to go. So Nunchuck City by Brian Asman, which was a really fun, very silly book set in a kind of city where everyone knows Kung Fu, uses all kind of different Kung Fu tropes and things like that. There's like kind of kaiju stuff going on, all sorts of stuff going on in this book. Very silly, but very, very funny. Then read slightly less good, Airport Cop by Charles Myron, a book about a cop who works at an airport. So kind of a police procedural from the 70s, written at the time when, lots of people were experiencing airports and flying and things like that who hadn't before. So there was a real interest in airports and aviation. So kind of there were multiple different subplots to this, but kind of a reasonably entertaining police procedural. And then finally read the Charnel Caves by Guy Smith, the final of his Crabs series of books. So this was fun. It was like typical Guy Smith crab type stuff. So killer crabs terrorising a coastal community, but fantastically, there's a bit where the crabs attack a Russian nuclear submarine, which was particularly brilliant. So just an entertaining creature feature type book. So that is everything I read for GarbAugust, which was a lot. So if you've managed to last this long in the video, well done. There were 2 things I DNF'd. One of which was, well, actually, I haven't officially DNF'd Battlefield Earth yet, but I did start reading Battlefield Earth by L. Ron Hubbard, and I've got over a third of the way through. I haven't read any more of it for at least a week, but I am intending to try and struggle through it. So, kind of continuing with that one, and also started reading, but did DNF, a book called, what was it called? No Coincidences, which is based in the Cyberpunk 2077 kind of universe. So another book based on a video game. So that's by an author called Rafał Kozik. And it was okay, but it just wasn't gripping me. So it's kind of a heist type story set in Night City, the city that Cyberpunk is set in. So quite entertaining, but it didn't grip me massively, and I ended up putting it aside and going on to reading other things. So yes, that was my GarbAugust. I hope you all had a fantastic GarbAugust too, if you took part. If you did, thank you very much for being part of it. And a big thank you to all of my co-hosts who I will list in the description for this video. It's been fantastic watching everybody's videos and watching videos from people who weren't co-hosts as well, who took part. GarbAugust is an absolutely joyful event for me. I really love it. I love these kinds of, trashy books that are just trying to cash in on, something popular that's going on at the time, but are often, really genuinely entertaining books as well. So I had a great time with these 40 books. And as I say, I hope you had a good time with it too. Thank you so much for taking part if you did. And as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.